The morning Alexandra Montgomery learned of her fate, rain lashed against the windows of Montgomery Hall with such ferocity it seemed the heavens themselves protested what was to come. She stood in her father's study, still wearing her riding habit, mud-splattered and improper, having been summoned directly from the stables. Her dark hair had escaped its pins during her morning gallop, wild tendrils framing a face flushed with exertion and, increasingly, with fury. Charles Montgomery, the Marquis of Ashford, sat behind his mahogany desk like a judge preparing to deliver sentence. His expression was granite, unmoved by the storm building in his daughter's eyes, a storm he had witnessed countless times over her 22 years. "You cannot be serious," Alexandra said, her voice low and dangerous. "I am perfectly serious." Her father's tone brooked no argument. "The contracts have been drawn, the settlement agreed upon. You will marry Frederick Hawthorne, the Duke of Blackmore, 3 weeks hence." "The Duke of Blackmore?" Alexandra's voice rose, incredulity giving way to outrage. "That man is a beast. The whole of London whispers about him, how he shut himself away after his wife died, how he speaks to no one, how his very gaze can freeze a person where they stand. Precisely why this match is so advantageous." Her father rose from his chair, moving to the window to observe the rain. "The Duke requires a wife. We require his wealth and influence. It is a perfectly reasonable arrangement." "Reasonable?" Alexandra felt her hands curling into fists at her sides. "You speak of me as though I were a broodmare to be sold at Tattersall's. Do not be dramatic, Alexandra. This is how our world functions. Your mother and I were matched by our parents, and we have enjoyed a perfectly adequate marriage." Adequate. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. How wonderfully romantic. Her father turned, his eyes hard. "You are 22 years old. You have refused every suitable gentleman who has shown interest. Lord Pemberton, the Earl of Essex, even Sir Thomas Wainwright, who was genuinely fond of you. Lord Pemberton is a pompous boor who speaks only of his hunting dogs. The Earl of Essex has the wit of a fence post. And Sir Thomas," Alexandra paused, her voice dripping with disdain, "believed a woman's sole purpose was to ornament a man's drawing-room and produce heirs with maximum efficiency and minimum conversation. And what, pray tell, do you believe a woman's purpose to be?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. "I believe," Alexandra said slowly, deliberately, "that a woman should have some say in her own destiny. That she should be more than property exchanged between men for profit." Her father's jaw tightened. "Those are dangerous thoughts, daughter, the kind of thoughts that lead to spinsterhood and scandal. Is that what you wish? To become a cautionary tale whispered about in drawing-rooms? Poor Alexandra Montgomery, too wild and opinionated to secure a husband? Better that than to be sold like cattle to a man known throughout England as the Beast of Blackmore." "Enough!" Her father's palm struck the desk with such force that the inkwell rattled. "You will cease this hysterical display immediately. The Duke of Blackmore is one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England. His bloodline is impeccable, his estates vast. Any woman in the kingdom would consider herself fortunate to receive such an offer. Then let one of those women have him. The Duke has chosen you, and I have accepted on your behalf. The matter is settled." Alexandra stared at her father as though seeing him clearly for the first time. This man who claimed to act in her best interest while selling her future to a stranger. "You speak of this as though I have no choice. You do not." His voice was final, absolute. "I am your father and your guardian. By law, by tradition, and by every custom of decent society, this decision is mine to make. And my wishes? My feelings? Do they count for nothing?" "Your wishes," her father said coldly, "have been indulged far too long already. Your mother exhausted herself trying to mold you into something resembling a proper young lady. Every torn dress, every scraped knee, every mortifying display of unladylike behavior, she bore it all with patience I can only marvel at. But that patience has reached its limit. You will marry the Duke of Blackmore, Alexandra. You will become his Duchess. And you will finally learn what it means to be a woman of quality in this society." The words struck her like physical blows. Alexandra felt her throat tighten, felt the hot sting of tears she refused to shed in front of this man who had just crushed every dream she had never quite dared to speak aloud. "I will not do it," she whispered. "You will, or I shall cut you off entirely. No inheritance, no home, no support of any kind. You will have nothing. Is that what you prefer? To be cast out with no means, no protection, no future whatsoever? Alexandra's breath came in short, sharp gasps. The walls of the study seemed to close in around her, the Persian carpet beneath her feet suddenly unstable, as the deck of a ship in a storm. You would truly do that? She asked, though she already knew the answer. You would cast me out, your own daughter, for refusing to marry a man I have never even met? I would do what is necessary to ensure you do not destroy yourself through sheer stubborn foolishness. Her father returned to his desk, sitting down with an air of weary finality. You have 3 weeks to reconcile yourself to your new circumstances. I suggest you use that time to adjust your expectations and your attitude. The Duke of Blackmore is not a man who tolerates disobedience. How perfectly splendid, Alexandra said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. A tyrant for a husband, just what every woman dreams of. That will be quite enough. You are dismissed. Alexandra did not move. She stood there staring at her father, memorizing his face, this man who valued wealth and position above his own child's happiness. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and strode from the study, her spine rigid, her head high. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not yet. The following days passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like a funeral procession than wedding planning. Alexandra's mother, Lady Catherine Montgomery, fluttered about with swatches of fabric and sample invitations, her voice a constant stream of anxiety about seating arrangements and menu selections, and whether the Duke preferred hothouse roses or peonies. Alexandra endured it all with a frozen politeness that alarmed her mother more than her previous outbursts had. "Darling," Lady Catherine said one afternoon as they sat in the drawing-room, a modiste presenting sketches of potential wedding gowns, "you have been so very quiet. Are you unwell?" "I am perfectly well, Mamma. It is natural to feel nervous before one's wedding. I remember when I was to marry your father, I could scarcely eat for a week beforehand." "Did you have a choice in the matter?" Alexandra interrupted, her eyes still fixed on the fashion plates before her, though she saw none of them. "When Papa asked for your hand, could you have refused him?" Lady Catherine's hand stilled on the fabric samples. "That is a complicated question. It seems rather simple to me." Her mother sighed, dismissing the modiste with a gentle wave before turning her full attention to her daughter. "Alexandra, I know you believe yourself trapped, but you must understand, this is how the world works, how it has always worked. A woman's security, her future, her very survival depends upon making an advantageous match. So you had no choice either. I had limited options. My family was not wealthy. Your father's offer was generous, and my parents were pleased. I was grateful for the opportunity to become a marchioness, to secure my family's position. And did you love him?" The question hung between them, dangerous and forbidden. "I came to hold him in great affection," Lady Catherine said carefully. "Love, I learned, is not the dramatic passion poets write of. It is something quieter, built over time through shared experiences and mutual respect." "How very practical." Alexandra's voice was bitter. "It is survival, my dear." Her mother reached across to clasp Alexandra's hand. "And I pray you will find what I found. That duty can become something warmer, given time and patience." But Alexandra pulled her hand away, unable to bear the touch, the platitudes, the gentle acceptance of captivity dressed up as wisdom. "The Duke arrives tomorrow," her mother continued softly, "to take tea with us. It would be advisable if you were to make a favorable impression." "Of course," Alexandra said hollowly. "Heaven forbid I disappoint my purchaser before the sale is finalized." "Alexandra?" But she was already rising, already moving toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of her mother's resigned acceptance, her father's iron will, the inexorable march toward a future she had never chosen. She fled to the only place that had ever truly been hers, the stables. The head groom, old Thomas, looked up in surprise as Alexandra burst through the stable doors, her fine morning dress completely inappropriate for the setting. "Miss Alexandra," he began, but she was already moving toward her mare's stall, toward freedom, toward the one thing in her life she could still control. "Saddle Tempest," she commanded, her voice brooking no argument. "Quickly, please." "But miss, you haven't a riding habit." "I do not care. Saddle her, now." Something in her voice must have conveyed the desperation she felt, because Thomas nodded and moved to comply. Within minutes, Alexandra was mounted, her day dress tucked up scandalously, her hair already coming loose from its pins. She kicked Tempest into a gallop before they had even fully cleared the stable yard. The countryside flew past in a blur of green and grey. The wind tore at her hair, her dress, her very skin, but she welcomed it. Out here, racing across fields with no destination in mind, she could almost pretend she was free, that tomorrow was not coming, that in 3 weeks she would not become the property of a man known throughout England as the Beast. Tempest's hooves thundered across the ground, and Alexandra leaned low over her neck, urging her faster, faster, as though speed alone could carry her away from her fate. But eventually, even the swiftest horse must tire. Even the most desperate flight must end. Alexandra finally pulled Tempest to a halt atop a hill overlooking her father's estate. Below, Montgomery Hall spread out in all its elegant glory, beautiful, proper, and utterly suffocating. Somewhere in that house her wedding dress was being sewn. Invitations were being addressed. A future was being carefully constructed without any input from its principal participant. And tomorrow she would meet the man who had purchased her, Frederick Hawthorne, the Duke of Blackmore, the Beast who waited to claim his unwilling bride. Alexandra closed her eyes against the tears that finally mercifully came. The wind carried them away, along with any illusions she had harbored about controlling her own destiny. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, she would grieve for the life she would never have. The Duke of Blackmore arrived precisely at 3 o'clock as promised. Alexandra watched from her bedroom window as the impressive black carriage, bearing the Blackmore coat of arms in gold leaf, rolled up the curved drive of Montgomery Hall. Even the conveyance seemed ominous, she thought bitterly, all dark elegance and restrained power. A footman rushed to open the carriage door, and Alexandra held her breath as a tall figure emerged. Frederick Hawthorne was not what she had expected. The rumours had painted him as some Gothic horror, a monster in human form. But the man who stood before Montgomery Hall, adjusting his gloves with precise movements, was handsome, devastatingly so, in a cold, severe way that made Alexandra's breath catch despite herself. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled his impeccably tailored coat. His hair was dark as midnight, swept back from a face all sharp angles and aristocratic features. Even from this distance, she could see the hard set of his jaw, the rigid line of his spine. He moved like a man accustomed to absolute command, every gesture controlled and deliberate. "He looks rather like a Greek statue," her mother observed from the doorway, making Alexandra jump. "Cold and perfect and utterly unyielding." "A statue would be preferable," Alexandra muttered. "At least it would not expect conversation." "Alexandra," her mother's voice held a warning. "You promised you would be civil." "I promised I would be present. Civility was never guaranteed." Lady Catherine sighed deeply. "Please, darling, for your own sake, if not for mine, just try to make this easier on yourself." Before Alexandra could respond, a knock sounded at the door. A maid appeared, curtsying. "Begging your pardon, my lady miss, but the Marquis requests your presence in the drawing-room. The Duke has arrived." "We shall be down directly," Lady Catherine said, then turned to her daughter with something close to desperation in her eyes. "Please, Alexandra, do not make this worse than it already is." Alexandra looked at herself in the mirror, at the pale pink dress her mother had insisted upon, at her hair arranged in careful ringlets, at the picture of docile femininity she presented. She barely recognized herself. "Very well," she said quietly. "Let us go meet my purchaser." The drawing-room had been prepared as though for royalty. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. The best china had been brought out. Cakes and sandwiches arranged on silver trays. All this pageantry, Alexandra thought, for a man who has already paid for his prize. Her father stood near the fireplace, engaging the Duke in conversation about hunting, it sounded like. How perfectly ordinary, how wonderfully banal, as though they were not discussing the disposal of a human being, as though she were a horse or a painting. "Ah, there you are," the Marquis said, as Alexandra and her mother entered. "Your Grace, may I present my wife, Lady Catherine, and my daughter, Miss Alexandra Montgomery?" The Duke turned, and Alexandra forgot how to breathe. Up close, Frederick Hawthorne was even more imposing than he had appeared from her window, but it was his eyes that truly unsettled her. Grey as a winter storm and just as cold, they swept over her with the assessing gaze of a man examining livestock at market. She felt her spine stiffen, her chin lift in instinctive defiance. "Miss Montgomery." His voice was deep, cultured and utterly devoid of warmth. He bowed with perfect propriety. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance." Liar, she thought. "You care nothing for me beyond what I represent. A womb to bear your heirs, a hostess for your estate, a decoration to prove you have fulfilled society's expectations." But aloud, she said only, "Your Grace," and executed a curtsy that was technically correct, but lacked any warmth. His eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication he had registered her coldness. "Please do sit," Lady Catherine said, with forced cheerfulness, gesturing to the arrangement of furniture. "I shall ring for tea." The next 30 minutes were a special kind of torture. Her parents made polite conversation. The Duke responded with equal politeness, and Alexandra sat in frozen silence, her tea growing cold in her cup, watching this farce unfold. "Miss Montgomery has been looking forward to this visit," her father lied smoothly. "Haven't you, my dear?" With bated breath, Alexandra said, her tone so dry it could have started fires. The Duke's attention shifted fully to her for the first time. "You do not seem pleased with this arrangement." The bluntness startled her. She had expected continued pretense, not this direct confrontation. "Would you be pleased, Your Grace, if you were being sold into matrimony with a complete stranger?" "Alexandra!" her mother gasped. But the Duke held up one hand, his eyes never leaving Alexandra's face. "A fair question." He leaned back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who had never doubted his own power. "However, I was not aware that selling was an accurate description. Your father and I have come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. How lovely for you both. How wonderful that you had any say in the matter at all." "That is quite enough," her father said sharply. "You will apologize to His Grace immediately." "Will I?" Alexandra turned to her father, something reckless building in her chest. "And if I refuse? Will you threaten to cut me off again?" "Oh, but wait. You need not bother. I am already sold, are I not? The contract's drawn, the settlements agreed upon. What more can you possibly take from me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Catherine looked as though she might faint. The Marquis had gone an alarming shade of red. And the Duke was watching her with something that might have been interest had his expression not been carved from ice. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "Miss Montgomery and I might take a turn about the gardens, alone." "I hardly think that would be appropriate," Lady Catherine protested weakly. "We are to be married in less than 3 weeks, the Duke said, his tone making it clear this was not a request. "I believe propriety can be stretched to allow a brief, chaperoned walk. Your maid can follow at a discreet distance." It was not a question. Alexandra recognized the voice of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. "Very well," her father said through clenched teeth. "Alexandra, you will accompany His Grace. And you will endeavor to behave with some measure of the decorum expected of your station." They walked in silence for several minutes, a maid following 20 paces behind. The gardens of Montgomery Hall were extensive, all manicured paths and careful landscaping, beautiful and utterly controlled. "Rather like my life," Alexandra thought bitterly. "You may speak freely," the Duke said finally. "I prefer honesty to pretty lies." "How magnanimous of you. You are angry. What keen powers of observation you possess." He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Miss Montgomery, let us dispense with games. You do not wish to marry me. This is abundantly clear. However, the marriage will proceed regardless of your wishes or mine. Given that reality, would it not be more practical to approach this situation with some degree of civility?" "Civility," Alexandra repeated, something snapping inside her. "I speak of civility while discussing a transaction that treats me as property. Do you have any idea how that feels? To know you are worth nothing beyond your bloodline and your ability to produce heirs?" "I do, actually." His voice remained level, but something flickered in those grey eyes. "I am also a commodity, Miss Montgomery. I have wealth, a title, estates that must be maintained. Society expects me to remarry, to produce an heir to continue the Blackmore line. I have as little choice in this as you do. You have every choice. You could refuse, you could walk away, no one can force you to. And what would you have me do? He took a step closer, and Alexandra fought the urge to retreat. Remain alone in that vast empty house for the rest of my days? Watch the title and estates I have worked to maintain fall into decay because I was too selfish to do my duty? Duty. She spat the word like a curse. Everyone speaks of duty as though it absolves all sins, as though fulfilling one's obligations to society matters more than one's own happiness, one's own heart. The heart, he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp, is a poor guide for making decisions that affect not only ourselves, but entire families, estates, and legacies. Spoken like a man who has never consulted his heart about anything. Spoken like a woman who has never had to consider anyone's needs beyond her own. The accusation stung precisely because it held some truth, but Alexandra refused to flinch. You know nothing about me. I know enough. I know you are spoiled, willful, and apparently determined to make both our lives miserable out of some misguided notion of feminine independence. And I know you are cold, arrogant, and utterly incapable of seeing women as anything beyond vessels for your precious heirs. They stood nearly nose to nose now, both breathing hard, eyes locked in mutual fury. In 3 weeks, the Duke said, his voice dangerously quiet, you will become my wife. You will be the Duchess of Blackmore, and you will learn what that title requires: obedience, propriety, and the good sense to know when you have been granted a privilege rather than subjected to a punishment. A privilege? You call this a privilege? Do you have any concept of how many women would trade places with you in an instant? The wealth, the position, the security I am offering? I do not want your wealth. I do not want your position. I want... She stopped, her throat closing around words she could not say. I want to be free. I want to choose my own path. I want to matter as more than just a womb and a title. What do you want? He asked, and for just a moment something in his tone shifted, became almost curious rather than condemning. Alexandra looked away, unable to bear that penetrating gaze any longer. It does not matter what I want. As you so graciously pointed out, the decision has been made. Yes, it has. He stepped back, his expression shuttering once more into that impenetrable coldness. I shall return in 1 week to discuss wedding arrangements with your father. I suggest you use that time to reconcile yourself to your new circumstances, Miss Montgomery. Blackmore House is not a place for childish tantrums and foolish rebellion. And what is it a place for, Your Grace? Misery, resignation, the slow death of every hope and dream one has ever dared to hold? It is a place, he said quietly, where duty comes before all else. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us. He bowed, perfectly, coldly proper, and strode back toward the house, leaving Alexandra standing alone among the roses, her hands trembling with rage and something else she could not name. This was the man she would marry, this cold, imperious stranger who spoke of duty and legacy, and saw her as nothing more than a necessary inconvenience. Heavens above, she thought. What have I done to deserve such a fate? But the gardens offered no answer, and the roses, beautiful and carefully pruned, only reminded her that even nature itself was tamed and controlled within these walls, just as she would be. In 3 weeks, she would enter Blackmore House as its Duchess, and she had no idea how she would survive it. The wedding took place on a grey morning in late March, under skies that threatened rain, but never quite delivered. Alexandra went through the ceremony as though observing it from a great distance. Some other woman standing at the altar in a dress of ivory silk, some other woman speaking vows she did not mean to a man whose ring felt like a shackle on her finger. Frederick Hawthorne became her husband with the same cold precision he brought to everything else. His voice never wavered as he promised to honor and cherish her. His hand was steady as he slipped the wedding band onto her finger. And when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, his kiss was brief, perfunctory, and utterly devoid of feeling. Well, he murmured against her lips, too quietly for anyone else to hear, it is done. Yes, Alexandra thought, it is done, and I am well and truly trapped. The wedding breakfast passed in a blur of faces and forced smiles. Guests offered congratulations she did not want. Her mother wept with what might have been joy or might have been sorrow. Alexandra could not tell and found she did not much care. Her father looked satisfied, like a man who had just concluded a profitable business transaction, which, she supposed, he had. The Duke, her husband now, heaven help her, stood beside her throughout, accepting well-wishes with aristocratic grace. He introduced her to what seemed like half of England's nobility, and Alexandra smiled until her face ached and curtsied, until her knees protested and spoke in light, pleasant tones that sounded nothing like her own voice. "You play the role well," Frederick observed as they finally took their seats for the wedding breakfast. "I had worried you might create a scene. Would that have been preferable, Your Grace?" She reached for her wine-glass, needing something, anything, to occupy her hands. "Would you have preferred I wept and wailed and threw myself on the floor in protest?" "I would have preferred honesty, but I shall settle for civility in public, and we may be as honest as we like in private." "How generous!" His jaw tightened, the only sign her barbs were landing. "We leave for Blackmore House within the hour. I trust you are prepared. As prepared as one can be to enter one's prison." "It is not a prison. It is one of the finest estates in England." "Then why," Alexandra asked quietly, "does everyone speak of it as though it were a tomb?" For just a moment something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or memory, but it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "Because," he said finally, "people enjoy dramatic stories, and a widower living alone in a vast house makes for excellent gossip. Was she very beautiful? Your first wife?" The question surprised them both. Alexandra had not meant to ask, had not wanted to know. But now that the words were out, she found herself genuinely curious about the woman who had held this position before her. "Yes," Frederick said, his voice carefully neutral. "Catherine was considered a great beauty. And did you love her?" "That," he said, rising abruptly, "is not a topic I care to discuss, particularly not at our wedding breakfast." He offered his hand. "Come, the carriages are ready." Alexandra accepted his hand because she had no choice, allowing him to lead her from the dining room, through corridors full of guests who smiled and whispered, out to where the Blackmore carriage waited, the same ominous black conveyance that had delivered him to Montgomery Hall 3 weeks ago. Her mother embraced her at the carriage door, whispering fierce instructions about duty and patience and making the best of one's circumstances. Her father kissed her forehead with something that might have been affection or might have been relief. And then she was inside the carriage, watching Montgomery Hall, the only home she had ever known, grow smaller and smaller through the window until it vanished entirely. She was alone with her husband, her stranger, her captor. They travelled in silence for nearly an hour before Frederick spoke. Blackmore House is approximately 2 hours from London. The estate encompasses over 10,000 acres. There are tenant farms, villages, extensive grounds. You will find it substantial. How lovely. Alexandra continued staring out the window at countryside that seemed to grow more desolate with each passing mile. As Duchess, you will have certain responsibilities. The household staff will require direction. There are social obligations, charitable works expected of your position. I am well aware of what is expected of a Duchess, Your Grace. Frederick. She turned to look at him, startled. What? My name is Frederick. You are my wife. You may use it. Would you prefer I did? He considered this with the same serious attention he seemed to apply to everything. I would prefer we not spend the next 40 years addressing each other with such formality. So, yes, I would prefer it. Very well. Frederick. The name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate for this stranger beside her. And you may call me Alexandra, I suppose. Since you own me now, you might as well use my Christian name. I do not own you. Do you not? The law says otherwise. Upon marriage, I became your property in every way that matters. My money, my possessions, even my own body, all legally yours now. That is not how I view our arrangement. How convenient for you that you may choose how to view a situation that benefits you entirely. Frederick's hands tightened on his knees. You are determined to be miserable. I am determined to be honest. You said you preferred it, did you not? I said I preferred it to pretty lies. I'm beginning to reconsider that position. Despite herself, Alexandra felt her lips twitch with something that might have been amusement had the situation been less dire. Truth is uncomfortable, is it not? So much easier to pretend we are both delighted with this arrangement. I never claimed to be delighted. Yet you pursued it nonetheless. Because it was necessary, Because I have responsibilities that extend beyond my own personal preferences. He shifted in his seat, turning to face her more fully. Did it ever occur to you that I might not have wanted to marry again? That I might have been perfectly content to remain alone? Then why did you not? Because being a duke is not about what I want. It is about duty, legacy, responsibility to hundreds of people who depend on the Blackmore estates for their livelihoods. It is about producing an heir, Alexandra finished bitterly. Yes, you have made that abundantly clear. Heaven forbid the precious Blackmore line should end with you. It is not vanity, is it not? This obsession with legacy, with carrying on one's name as though it matters beyond the next generation? It matters to the people whose homes and livelihoods depend on the estate's continued stability. It matters to... He stopped abruptly, jaw clenched, clearly fighting for control. This conversation is pointless. You have already decided I am a villain. Nothing I say will convince you otherwise. Alexandra turned back to the window, hating that he was partly right. She had built him up in her mind as a monster because it was easier to rage against a monster than to acknowledge that he might simply be a man trapped by circumstances as surely as she was. But she was not ready to soften toward him. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. They completed the journey in silence. Blackmore House rose from the landscape like something from a Gothic novel, all dark stone and imposing towers, surrounded by grounds that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Ancient trees lined the drive, their branches reaching toward each other overhead like grasping fingers. Even the sky seemed darker here, the clouds heavier. Good heavens, Alexandra breathed, genuine shock breaking through her carefully maintained hostility. It is enormous. Yes. Frederick's voice held neither pride nor apology. Simple statement of fact. The main house contains over 200 rooms. There are also the east and west wings, though we keep those closed most of the year. 200 rooms. She could not fathom it. For one person? For two now. He glanced at her. You need not sound so horrified. We shall likely spend most of our time in the family wing, which contains a mere 30 rooms or so. A mere 30. How wonderfully intimate. The carriage drew to a halt before the main entrance, where what seemed like an entire regiment of servants had assembled, all in perfect formation, all watching their new mistress with undisguised curiosity. Frederick descended first, then turned to offer his hand to Alexandra. She took it because she must, stepping down onto gravel that crunched beneath her slippers, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. Your Grace. An elderly man, the butler presumably, stepped forward with a deep bow. May I be the first to welcome you to Blackmore House. I am Dawson. I have served the Blackmore family for 43 years, and I am at your complete disposal. Thank you, Dawson. Alexandra managed what she hoped was a gracious smile, though inside she felt like running. Running far and fast, back to anything familiar, anywhere that did not feel quite so much like entering a beautiful tomb. Mrs. Blackwood will show you to your chambers, Frederick said, indicating a stern-looking woman in housekeeper's black. You may wish to rest before dinner. The journey can be taxing. Where will you be? Alexandra asked, then immediately regretted showing any interest in his whereabouts. I have estate business requiring attention. I shall see you at dinner, 8 o'clock. Do not be late. It was not a request. Alexandra watched him stride away, already issuing orders to a man who must have been his steward, already absorbed in matters that had nothing to do with her. This way, Your Grace, Mrs. Blackwood said, her voice not unkind but not warm either, reserved, watchful. If you will follow me. The Duchess's chambers were, like everything else in this house, enormous and intimidating. The bedroom alone was larger than the entire parlour at Montgomery Hall. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, its curtains a deep emerald green that matched the wallpaper. Heavy furniture, a wardrobe, a dressing table, several chairs, filled the room without making it feel cramped. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking grounds that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Your dressing room is through there, Mrs. Blackwood indicated a door to the left. Your private sitting room through there. The Duke's chambers are... Next door, Alexandra guessed, spotting the connecting door. Yes, Your Grace, though the door remains locked unless... The housekeeper trailed off delicately. Unless he wishes to exercise his marital rights, Alexandra finished flatly. Mrs. Blackwood's expression remained neutral, Quite so, Your Grace. Your trunks will arrive within the hour. A maid will be assigned to help you dress for dinner. Is there anything you require immediately? Yes, Alexandra wanted to scream. I require my freedom. I require a time machine to prevent this disaster. I require any escape from this beautiful prison. But aloud she said only, No, thank you, Mrs. Blackwood. That will be all. The housekeeper curtsied and withdrew, leaving Alexandra alone in chambers that would swallow her whole. She moved to the French doors, opening them despite the chill in the air, stepping out onto the balcony. From here she could see the full extent of the Blackmore estate, endless gardens giving way to parkland, parkland giving way to forest. Beautiful, manicured, controlled, like everything else in her new life. A knock at the door pulled her back inside. "Enter!" she called, expecting Mrs. Blackwood or perhaps a maid. Instead, Frederick stepped through, still in his travelling clothes, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to ensure you were settling in," he said, an awkwardness in his voice she had not heard before. How very considerate. He moved further into the room, his presence somehow making the enormous space feel smaller. "Alexandra, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I know this is not what you wanted, but it is what we have, and I would prefer we not spend our lives as enemies." "What would you prefer?" "A partnership, perhaps. Mutual respect, if not affection. Civility, at minimum." "You ask a great deal. I ask for basic human decency between two people bound together by law and circumstance." He moved to the window, staring out at his lands. "This house has been cold and silent for too long. I do not wish to make it a battlefield as well." Something in his voice, a weariness, a loneliness, made Alexandra pause, made her look at him properly for the first time since the wedding. He looked tired, genuinely, deeply tired. Not just physically, but tired in a way that suggested years of carrying burdens alone. "Why did you choose me?" she asked quietly. "Of all the women available, why me specifically?" He turned to face her, and for once his expression was open, unguarded. "Because you were alive. Because when I saw you at the Hendersons' ball 6 months ago, you do not remember, but I was there, and I saw you laughing with your friends, arguing with some young lord about politics, being so vibrantly, fiercely yourself. I thought—" He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "I thought that perhaps someone with that much life in them might bring some warmth back to this place." Alexandra stared at him, utterly thrown. "You chose me because I was alive? I chose you because you seemed incapable of pretense, because you were honest even when honesty was inconvenient, because this house has been filled with ghosts and silence for too long, and I thought—" He trailed off, looking away. "I thought perhaps you might chase some of the darkness away. So I am to be your source of light." Anger flickered back to life. "A decorative candle to brighten your gloomy house? That is not what I meant, is it not? You speak of warmth and life as though I exist solely to improve your circumstances. Did you ever consider what I might want, what I might need?" "Of course You did not. You cannot. Because to you I am not a person with my own dreams and desires. I am a solution to your problem, a means to an end." She felt tears threaten and forced them back through sheer will. "I will not be your light, Frederick. I will not chase away your darkness. I am not responsible for your happiness or the warmth of this God-forsaken house." "I never said you were—" "Then what are you saying? What exactly do you want from me?" "I want—" He stopped, seeming as surprised by the question as she was by his earlier confession. "I want peace. I want to walk through my own home without feeling like a ghost haunting it. I want to sit down to dinner with another human being and have a civil conversation. I want to stop being so damned alone all the time." The raw honesty in his voice stripped away her anger, leaving behind something more complicated. He was lonely. This cold, arrogant duke, he was desperately, achingly lonely. "I cannot fix that for you," Alexandra said softly. "I cannot be what you need me to be. I can barely manage to be what I need myself to be." "I know." He moved toward the door, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I apologize for disturbing you. Please rest. Dinner at 8. He was nearly to the door when Alexandra heard herself say, "Frederick." He turned, hope flickering in those grey eyes. "I shall try," she said, the words costing her more than she expected. "I cannot promise to be—" to make this easy, but I shall try not to make it deliberately difficult." It was the smallest olive branch imaginable. But his expression transformed, something almost like gratitude crossing his features. "That is all I ask," he said quietly. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Alexandra alone with the uncomfortable realization that her husband might be less monster and more man than she had wanted to believe, which somehow made everything infinitely more complicated. Dinner that first night at Blackmore House was an exercise in careful civility. They sat at opposite ends of a dining table that could easily have seated 30, an absurd expanse of polished mahogany between them, served by silent footmen who appeared and disappeared like phantoms. Alexandra had changed into an evening gown of deep blue, one her mother had insisted upon, saying it brought out her eyes. She had allowed the assigned maid, a young woman named Betty, to arrange her hair in an elaborate style she would never have chosen herself. Playing dress-up, she thought bitterly, playing at being a duchess. Frederick had also changed, now wearing evening dress that made him look even more imposing, all severe, black and white, perfectly tailored, devastatingly handsome, in a way that irritated Alexandra more than she cared to admit. "The soup is excellent," she offered, because someone had to break the oppressive silence. "Mrs. Henderson has been cook here for 20 years. She is quite skilled." Frederick gestured to a footman who immediately refilled his wineglass. "I have instructed her to consult with you regarding menus, should you wish to make changes." "That is considerate. Thank you." More silence. The footman served the next course, some sort of fish in sauce. Alexandra pushed it around her plate. Appetite vanished. "Tell me about your first wife," she said abruptly, tired of tiptoeing around the subject. "If we are to be partners, as you suggest, should I not know about the woman who held this position before me?" Frederick's fork stilled halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, precisely, then reached for his wineglass. "Catherine," he said finally, "was everything a duchess should be. Beautiful, accomplished, perfectly mannered. She came from an excellent family. Our parents arranged the match when we were both quite young. Did you love her?" "I cared for her. Greatly. She was—" He paused, staring into his wine as though it might hold answers. "She was fragile, delicate, the sort of woman who needed protecting. And she died. In childbirth. The babe as well. A son." His voice remained steady, but Alexandra saw his knuckles whiten around the wineglass stem. "She suffered for 2 days before the end. Frederick, Alexandra stopped, horrified by her own callousness. "I'm so sorry. I should not have pushed." "No." He looked up, meeting her eyes across that ridiculous expanse of table. "You have every right to ask. This house carries her memory in every corner. You should know whose ghost you are expected to live alongside. Is that why everything feels so—" She gestured vaguely at their surroundings, the formal place settings, the heavy silver, the oppressive grandeur. "So carefully preserved? As though time stopped the day she died? Perhaps?" He set down his wineglass with a decisive click. "After she passed, I could not bear to change anything. It felt like erasing her somehow, like admitting she had truly gone. But she has gone, Frederick. And you—" Alexandra chose her words carefully. "You are still here, still living. This house should reflect that. Are you suggesting I have been dwelling in the past? I am suggesting that perhaps we are both prisoners here, me of circumstance, you of memory." Something shifted in his expression, surprised perhaps that she would extend that sort of understanding. Before he could respond, thunder rumbled outside, loud enough to rattle the windows. Within moments, rain began pelting the glass in sheets. "The storm has finally arrived," Frederick observed, rising from his chair. "I should check that the groundskeepers secured the garden furniture. If you will excuse me, I shall come with you." He turned, surprise clear on his face. "That is not necessary. The rain is quite—" "I am not made of sugar, Frederick. I shall not melt." Alexandra was already standing, grateful for any excuse to leave this cavernous dining room. "Besides, you said you wanted partnership. Partners do not sit idly by while the other works." For a moment she thought he would argue, but instead something like respect flickered across his features. "Very well, but we shall need coats. The storm is fierce." They made their way through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, Frederick leading her through what must have been a servant's passage. Faster, he explained, than going through the main house. A housekeeper produced heavy coats and sturdy boots. Alexandra struggled with the unfamiliar fastenings until Frederick wordlessly knelt before her, adjusting the boots with surprising gentleness. "I am capable of managing my own footwear," she protested. "I know. But these buckles are tricky, and we are in rather a hurry." He finished with the second boot and stood, shrugging into his own coat. "Ready?" They emerged into the storm through a side door, immediately assaulted by wind and rain. Alexandra gasped as cold water struck her face, but Frederick had already grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the gardens. "This way!" he shouted over the wind. "The main fountain needs securing." They ran together through the downpour, their coats quickly soaked through. The fountain, an elaborate marble affair featuring some sort of mythological scene, stood in the center of the main garden, water overflowing its basins, the decorative figures around its base at risk of being toppled by the fierce wind. Frederick immediately set to work securing loose elements, his movements sure despite the rain. Alexandra watched for only a moment before joining him, grabbing hold of a marble dolphin that was rocking dangerously. "Careful!" Frederick called out. "That piece is heavier than it—" The dolphin shifted suddenly, its weight pulling Alexandra forward. She would have fallen directly into the overflowing fountain had Frederick not caught her, his arms coming around her waist, steadying her against him. For a moment they stood frozen, pressed together, rain streaming down their faces, his arms solid and warm around her, despite the cold. "Thank you," Alexandra gasped, acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. "You must be more careful," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only concern. "I was being careful. The wretched dolphin was not." Despite the circumstances, despite the cold and the storm and everything else, Frederick laughed. Actually laughed. The sound startled out of him, his face transformed by genuine amusement. And Alexandra, soaked to the skin and shivering in her husband's arms in the middle of a storm, found herself laughing too. "We are completely mad," she managed between giggles. "Standing in a deluge, wrestling with decorative sea creatures, attempting to save them from the indignity of toppling over," Frederick added, his own laughter subsiding into a grin that made him look years younger. "Yes, I believe madness is an accurate assessment." "What happened?" a voice called from the house. Several groundskeepers were emerging, clearly having just realized their duke was outside in the storm. "Nothing that cannot wait until morning," Frederick called back. Then more quietly to Alexandra, "Come before we both catch our deaths." They hurried back inside, leaving puddles in their wake. Betty and Mrs. Blackwood appeared immediately, clucking with concern, rushing them toward their respective chambers to change into dry clothing. "The Duke will want hot water brought up," Mrs. Blackwood was saying. "And you as well, Your Grace. We cannot have you falling ill on your first day." "I am quite hardy, Mrs. Blackwood," Alexandra protested, though her teeth were chattering. "I have been far wetter than this while riding." "Nevertheless, Your Grace, a hot bath would be advisable." An hour later, bathed and dressed in a warm nightgown with a wrapper over it, Alexandra sat before the fire in her private sitting room, a cup of hot tea warming her hands. She should have felt miserable. She should have been cursing this house, this marriage, this entire situation. Instead, she found herself remembering Frederick's laughter, the way his face had transformed, becoming younger, lighter, the strength of his arms around her as he kept her from falling. A knock at the connecting door startled her. "Alexandra," Frederick's voice muffled through the heavy wood. "May I? Are you decent? I am in my night clothes but properly covered. You may enter." The door opened to reveal Frederick in his dressing gown, hair still damp from his own bath, looking far more human and far less ducal than she had ever seen him. "I wanted to ensure you were well," he said, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. "That was foolish of me, dragging you out into the storm. You did not drag me, I chose to come. Still, I should not have allowed—" "Frederick," she set down her teacup, "I am not a porcelain doll who will shatter at the first sign of difficulty. I grew up riding in all weather, climbing trees, doing all manner of things my mother found horrifying. A bit of rain will not destroy me." He moved further into the room, drawn by the fire. Catherine would have been horrified by tonight's adventure. She would have hidden in her rooms for days, recovering from the shock of getting her slippers wet. It was not said unkindly, simply statement of fact. "I am not Catherine," Alexandra said quietly. "No." He turned to look at her, firelight dancing across his features. "You are not, and I—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I am beginning to think that may not be a bad thing." Something warm unfurled in Alexandra's chest at those words. Something dangerous. "We laughed together tonight," she said, "in the middle of a storm, fighting with garden statuary. That was unexpected." "Yes." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "It was rather absurd, was it not? Completely absurd, and yet—" She trailed off, not sure how to explain what she meant. "And yet it felt good," Frederick finished for her. "To laugh. To do something ridiculous without worrying about propriety or what anyone might think. Is that not what you wanted?" Alexandra asked. "When you said this house had been too quiet, too full of ghosts? Someone to bring warmth and life?" "I wanted that, yes. But I did not know what that might actually mean, what it might feel like." He crossed to the chair opposite hers, sitting down with a sigh. "Alexandra, I need to be honest with you about something." "Very well. When I married Catherine, I was 19 years old. I had no idea what marriage truly required beyond the technical aspects. We were cordial, affectionate even, but we never laughed together the way you and I did tonight. We never ran through storms or argued about anything of substance. She wanted to please me and I wanted to protect her, and somehow in all of that we never quite—" He gestured helplessly. "We never quite found each other, I suppose. That sounds terribly lonely." It was, and after she died I told myself I would never marry again, that I had fulfilled my duty once, and that was sufficient. But the years passed, and the house grew quieter, and I— He looked away, jaw working. I was 34 years old and felt ancient, tired, as though I had already lived my entire life and was simply waiting for it to end. "And so you decided to marry again." "And so I decided I needed to at least try to find something more than mere existence." He met her eyes. "I am making rather a mess of this explanation." "No," Alexandra said softly. "I think I understand. You wanted a companion, not just a wife." "Yes, exactly that. But I—" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear. "I have no idea how to be anything other than the Duke of Blackmore. I have been trained since birth to command, to control, to maintain distance and authority. The idea of simply being a man with a woman who might become a friend as well as a wife, I do not know how to do that." The vulnerability in his admission struck Alexandra deeply. This powerful, arrogant duke, he was just a man who had never learned how to be anything else. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we might learn together, how to be partners rather than merely duke and duchess." "You would be willing to try, even after everything?" "I remain furious about being sold like livestock," Alexandra said honestly. "I likely shall be for some time, but tonight, when we laughed together—" She paused, searching for the right words. "For just a moment I forgot to be angry, and that felt not terrible." Frederick's expression softened. "That is more than I had any right to hope for. Do not mistake me. I am not suddenly content with this arrangement. I still believe I should have had a choice, but I am beginning to think that perhaps—" She met his eyes. "Perhaps we need not be enemies. Perhaps we might find some measure of peace between us. I would like that." He stood, moving toward the connecting door. "I shall let you rest, but Alexandra—" "Yes? Thank you for tonight, for laughing with me, even though you had every reason not to." After he had gone, Alexandra sat staring into the fire for a long time, her tea growing cold, her thoughts tangled. She had not expected to like him, had not expected to see him as human rather than monster. But tonight, soaked and shivering and absurdly happy in the middle of a storm, she had glimpsed something she had not anticipated, the possibility that this marriage might become something more than a cage. The possibility that Frederick Hawthorne might become something more than her jailer. It was a dangerous thought, but as Alexandra finally climbed into the enormous bed, pulling the heavy coverlets around her, she found herself less terrified and more curious. What might tomorrow bring? What might they become to each other given time? She fell asleep, still wondering. The following weeks unfolded with surprising ease. Alexandra threw herself into learning the management of Blackmore House, much to Mrs. Blackwood's obvious surprise and grudging approval. She reviewed accounts, consulted with the cook, toured the tenant farms with Frederick's steward, made herself known to every servant in the household. "You need not involve yourself so thoroughly," Frederick observed one morning as they breakfasted together, a habit they had fallen into, much more pleasant than dining at opposite ends of that ridiculous table. Most duchesses leave such matters entirely to the housekeeper. Most duchesses were not raised by a mother who believed a lady should understand every aspect of managing a household, Alexandra replied, spreading jam on her toast. "Besides, I cannot simply sit about doing needlework all day. I should go mad." "Heaven forbid." But he was smiling as he said it. They fell into other habits as well. Evening walks through the gardens when weather permitted, reading together in the library after dinner, each absorbed in separate books but companionably close. Conversations that grew increasingly easy, increasingly honest. Alexandra learned that Frederick harbored a passion for astronomy and had an entire observatory built on the grounds, that he played the pianoforte when he thought no one could hear, and played it beautifully, that he secretly found most of the ton utterly insufferable, but endured society events out of duty. Frederick learned that Alexandra had a gift for mathematics that her tutors had found unsettling, that she had once jumped her horse over a 6-foot fence on a dare and broken her arm in the landing, that she wrote poetry she never showed anyone, keeping journals full of verses hidden in her dressing room. "Would you show them to me?" he asked one evening. "Your poems?" "Heavens no, they are dreadful." "I doubt that very much." "They are. Self-indulgent, melodramatic, full of terrible metaphors comparing emotions to weather phenomena, as opposed to all that excellent poetry comparing emotions to weather phenomena." He was teasing her, she realized, had learned how to tease her. "You are mocking me. I am expressing interest in something you care about. There is a difference." Alexandra set down her book, studying him across the library's comfortable space. "Why do you want to see them?" "Because they matter to you. Because I—" He paused, seeming to choose words carefully. "Because I want to know you, Alexandra. Not just the duchess who manages my household so efficiently, but the woman who rides like fury across fields and thinks mathematics is a gift rather than a chore and hides poetry in her dressing room." Something in her chest tightened at those words. "You said you wanted partnership, mutual respect." "I did. But this feels like more than that." "Does it?" He set down his own book, giving her his full attention. "Perhaps it is. Perhaps I—" He stopped, then continued more firmly. "Perhaps I am discovering that I like you, Alexandra, as a person. Is that so surprising?" "Yes," she wanted to say. "Yes, because I did not expect this, did not expect you to become someone I might like in return." But aloud, she said only, "I suppose not. Will you show me the poems?" She hesitated, then found herself nodding. "Very well, but you must promise not to laugh." "I promise." The next evening, she brought him a single page, one poem, carefully transcribed. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable, and Alexandra felt her heart hammering with irrational anxiety. "This is beautiful," he said finally. "You are merely being kind." "I am not." He looked up, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Alexandra, this is genuinely beautiful. The imagery, the emotion. You have real talent. It is just a silly hobby." "It is not silly." He stood, crossing to where she sat, the poem still in his hand. "You should not dismiss your own gifts so readily." They stood very close, closer than they had been since that night in the gardens. Alexandra found herself acutely aware of his height, his warmth, the way he was looking at her, as though really seeing her perhaps for the first time. "Frederick," she began, though she had no idea what she meant to say. "Alexandra." His voice was rough. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He seemed to struggle with himself, some internal battle playing out across his features. "I find myself thinking about you constantly, about how you laugh when something genuinely amuses you, about the way you argue with the steward about crop rotation, as though your life depends on it. About—" He stopped abruptly as Alexandra swayed slightly, one hand going to her temple. "Are you unwell?" Immediate concern replaced whatever he had been about to say. "Just a headache." "I have had them all day. I think perhaps I should—" But before she could finish, the room tilted alarmingly, and Frederick's arms came around her, catching her as her knees buckled. Alexandra? Alexandra! She tried to respond, but darkness was pulling at her, and suddenly she was elsewhere, Catherine's face pale and sweating, screaming in agony. Blood, so much blood. Frederick's voice, younger, desperate. Save her. Please. You must save her. But there was no saving her. No saving either of them. Alexandra! She came back to herself with a gasp, finding herself cradled against Frederick's chest as he carried her swiftly through corridors she barely recognized. What happened? She managed. You fainted. I am taking you to your chamber. We shall send for the physician. No. She gripped his coat. No, I am well. I saw something. A memory, I think. Yours, not mine. He had reached her chamber, pushing through the door with his shoulder, laying her gently on the bed. What are you talking about? Catherine. I saw her dying. Saw you there. Helpless. Alexandra looked up at him, still disoriented. It was so vivid, as though I had been there myself. All color drained from Frederick's face. That is not possible. Nevertheless, it happened. She struggled to sit up, but he pressed her gently back down. Rest, please. I shall send Betty to stay with you. Frederick, wait! But he was already moving toward the door, his shoulders rigid, his entire body radiating tension. I am sorry, she called after him. I did not mean to... Whatever that was, I did not mean... The door closed behind him, leaving Alexandra alone with Betty, who had appeared as though summoned, her face full of concern. Are you well, Your Grace? Shall I fetch Mrs. Blackwood? No, Alexandra pressed her hands to her face, trying to understand what had happened. The headache was gone, but the memory, if that was what it had been, remained vivid and terrible. She had seen Frederick's first wife die, had felt his anguish as though it were her own. How was that possible? And why had it frightened him so thoroughly? Frederick did not come to breakfast the next morning, or dinner that evening. For 3 days he avoided her completely, conducting estate business and taking his meals in his study. Alexandra felt his absence like a physical ache, which was absurd. She had not wanted this marriage, had resented him for weeks. Why should she miss him now? But she did. Miss his dry observations about the more ridiculous members of society. Miss the way he listened when she spoke, as though her opinions genuinely mattered. Miss the warmth of his rare smiles. On the 4th day, she decided enough was enough. She found him in the library, surrounded by ledgers, his face drawn and tired. This is ridiculous, she announced without preamble. Whatever frightened you about what I saw, we must discuss it. There is nothing to discuss. Is there not? You have been hiding from me for 4 days. I have been attending to estate business. You have been running away like a coward. The word hung in the air between them. Frederick stood slowly, his expression dangerous. You would do well to remember to whom you are speaking. I am speaking to my husband, who promised me partnership and honesty, and has instead been hiding like a frightened child. I am not frightened. Then what are you? Alexandra moved closer, refusing to be intimidated. Because from where I stand, you look absolutely terrified. You claim to have seen my wife die, he said, his voice low and intense. To have experienced my memories as though they were your own. How am I supposed to respond to that? What am I supposed to make of impossible things? I do not know what happened. I do not understand it any better than you do, but avoiding me will not make it go away. Will it not? He turned away, gripping the edge of his desk. Alexandra, when Catherine died, I thought I would go mad from grief and guilt. I failed to protect her, failed to save her, and now you... He stopped, jaw working. Now you have seen that failure, witnessed my helplessness. How am I supposed to look at you without remembering that? By remembering that I am not Catherine, Alexandra said softly, understanding dawning. That I am not fragile or delicate or in need of your protection from the world. You fainted in my arms, once, from a bizarre vision I cannot explain. That does not make me breakable, Frederick. She was breakable, and I broke her. By being what I am, by requiring an heir, by... Stop! Alexandra crossed to him, turning him forcibly to face her. Stop blaming yourself for something you could not have prevented. Women die in childbirth. It is tragic and terrible, but it is not anyone's fault. I should have protected her from the biological realities of being female. How exactly? By never touching her, by never wanting a family? She cupped his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Frederick, you cannot protect everyone from everything. You cannot control the entire world no matter how much you wish to. I want to protect you, he said, his voice breaking. I want to keep you safe, and I have no idea how. Then let me show you. She rose on her toes, bringing her face close to his. Trust that I am strong enough to face whatever comes. Trust that I will tell you when I need help, rather than expecting you to read my mind. Trust that we can face things together, rather than you bearing every burden alone. Alexandra. I am not her, she whispered. I am me, and I am here right now choosing to be here with you. For a long moment, Frederick simply stared at her, some internal war playing out across his features. Then his control shattered. He kissed her. Not the perfunctory brush of lips from their wedding, not a polite, restrained gesture between strangers fulfilling duty. This kiss was desperate, hungry, alive, with weeks of tension and longing and emotions neither of them had dared name. Alexandra gasped against his mouth, and he pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressing against the small of her back. She melted into him, into the kiss, into the sudden, overwhelming rightness of being exactly here, exactly now, with exactly this man. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexandra felt dizzy for an entirely different reason than 4 days ago. We should not, Frederick began. Should not what? She was still in his arms, reluctant to move. Should not kiss each other. We are married, Frederick. It is permitted. You have been so angry about this marriage. I have been angry about having no choice. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But I am choosing this right now. I am choosing you. You do not have to. I know I do not have to. I want to. She paused, then added more quietly, Do you want to? Or have I completely misread? He kissed her again, answering the question more thoroughly than words ever could. I want, he managed between kisses. I want you so badly it terrifies me. Then stop being terrified and want me properly. Something in his expression shifted, became heated, intent. Here? Now. Why not? Alexandra was already reaching for the buttons of his waistcoat, years of frustration and attraction and denied feeling suddenly demanding outlet. Unless you would prefer to maintain propriety and... He lifted her onto the desk, scattering ledgers and papers without care, kissing her with renewed intensity. Damn propriety. How very unducal of you, she laughed against his mouth. You make me forget to be a duke, he said, and there was wonder in his voice. You make me forget everything except that I am a man, and you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Later, much later, they lay together on the library sofa, hastily rearranged clothing restored to something approaching decency. Alexandra nestled against Frederick's chest, listening to his heartbeat. That was, she began. Yes, very, quite. They dissolved into laughter, the tension of weeks finally, blessedly broken. I am still angry, Alexandra said eventually, feeling she should make this clear. About being sold like property, about having no choice in this marriage. I know, but I am also... She paused, searching for words. I am also beginning to think that perhaps, despite the terrible circumstances, I may have landed somewhere not entirely horrible. High praise indeed, he said dryly, but his arms tightened around her. Give me time. I may upgrade you to actually rather pleasant eventually. I shall count the days. They fell silent, comfortable now in a way they had not been before. Outside, rain had begun falling again, pattering against the windows, but this time the sound was soothing rather than ominous. Frederick? What if we could choose this? Not the marriage itself, which was decided for us, but what we make of it, what we become to each other. She tilted her head to look up at him. What if we chose each other now with full knowledge and clear eyes? He studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Are you asking me to court you, Alexandra, after we are already married? I suppose I am. Is that terribly silly? It is the least silly thing I have ever heard. He brushed a strand of hair from her face with surprising tenderness. Very well then. Lady Alexandra Hawthorne, Duchess of Blackmore, would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you properly? I shall consider it, she said, trying to sound serious and failing entirely as a smile tugged at her lips. Provided you meet my standards, which are quite high. I would expect nothing less. They kissed again, softer now, sweeter, a promise rather than a demand. And somewhere in that kiss, in that moment, Alexandra felt something shift inside her. Some final wall crumbling, some last resistance melting away. She had not chosen this marriage, but she was choosing this man, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough. In the warmth of their growing love, Alexandra discovered she was with child. Frederick's terror was immediate and overwhelming. Memories of Catherine's death threatened to consume him, but Alexandra took his face in her hands and said firmly, I am not her. I am strong, and I will not leave you. When her time came, Frederick stayed by her side despite every convention. He held her hand through the labor, and when their daughter was born, healthy and perfect, Alexandra recovered quickly and well, her strength proving exactly what she had promised. They named her Hope Catherine Hawthorne. Frederick wept as he held his wife and daughter, finally understanding that the darkness of his past did not have to dictate his future. Alexandra had not merely survived, she had thrived. And together, with their child sleeping peacefully between them, they had built something neither had expected, a marriage born of obligation that had transformed into genuine, profound love. The Beast Duke had been tamed not through submission, but through partnership, and the tempest of a woman who had been sold into marriage had found not a prison, but a home. Blackmore House, once cold and silent, now rang with laughter and warmth. The couple who had begun as unwilling strangers had become inseparable partners, and their daughter would grow up knowing that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unexpected ways. The end. Dear listener, sometimes life places us in circumstances we never chose, paths we never wanted to walk, futures that feel like cages rather than possibilities. Alexandra did not choose her marriage. She raged against it, fought it, mourned the life she thought she deserved. And she was right to feel that anger. Her autonomy had been stolen, her voice silenced by those who claimed to know what was best for her. But here is what her story teaches us. We cannot always control what happens to us, but we can always choose what we do with it. Frederick did not choose his grief, his loneliness, or the weight of expectations that crushed him. He was as trapped as Alexandra, by duty, by loss, by the desperate fear that he would fail everyone who depended on him. Yet both of them discovered something powerful. Even in circumstances we did not choose, we can still choose how we show up each day. They chose honesty over pretense, vulnerability over armor, partnership over isolation. And slowly, so slowly, what began as a prison became a home. If you are facing something difficult tonight, know this. You are stronger than you believe. You have survived every difficult day so far, and that alone is proof of your resilience. Like Alexandra, you may be navigating circumstances that feel unfair, overwhelming, or impossible. Like Frederick, you may be carrying grief or fear that feels too heavy to bear alone. But you are not alone. Every sunrise is another chance to choose differently, to choose hope over despair, to choose connection over isolation, to choose to believe that even the hardest chapters can lead to beautiful endings. You deserve rest tonight. You deserve peace. You deserve to lay down the weight you have been carrying and trust that tomorrow will come, and you will have the strength to meet it. Sleep deeply, knowing you are protected, you are valued, you are exactly where you need to be, even if it does not feel that way yet. Your story is not finished, and the best chapters may still be waiting to be written. With gratitude and warmth, the Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. Your presence, your comments, and your support lift our spirits more than you know, and we are truly grateful from the bottom of our hearts. If this tale touched you in any way, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing. Your support helps us feel inspired and motivated to continue creating stories filled with love, redemption, longing, and unforgettable twists. At the end of this video, another suggestion from our channel will appear. Click it, and let yourself be carried away by more emotional, romantic journeys like this one. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall team.